Good day, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Jes Delos Santos and here are today's top stories. The government is bent on elevating the country's income status to upper middle income, and economic managers hope to hit that target by implementing an 8-point agenda. The International Monetary Fund raises its growth outlook for the Philippines this year while it forecasts global economy to grow slower than initially expected. The Bangko Sentral rules out another off-cycle rate hike. Governor Felipe Medalla also signals an increase of less than 75 basis points. Now, before we start our broadcast, details about the earthquake that rocked Metro Manila and other parts of Luzon are coming in. PH reports that the epicenter of the earthquake of the 7.3 magnitude quake was recorded in Lagangilang, Abra. Up to intensity 4 was felt in Quezon City. The agency warns the public to expect aftershocks and damage. Now keep it here on One News for more updates and stay safe, everyone. Now we begin our regular programming with the economic cluster laying down a blueprint that aims to improve the lives of Filipinos and to elevate the country's status into an upper middle income economy. Gerard de la Peña with the rest of the story.
On the area of foreign policy.
A day after President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. delivered his inaugural State of the Nation address, his economic team released an 8-point socioeconomic agenda. The plan aims to steer the economy back to its high-growth track and to reduce poverty rate to a single digit by 2028. The list includes measures for the protection of the purchasing power of Filipinos by ensuring food security and by reducing transport, logistics, and energy costs. The blueprint also aims to mitigate scarring from the COVID-19 pandemic and to ensure sound macroeconomic fundamentals. Jobs creation is also included in the 8-point agenda. Speaking of jobs, the plan seeks to create quality jobs through innovation and enhancement of the digital economy. Creating so-called green jobs is also on the horizon, as well as upholding public order and security and leveling the playing field by strengthening competition and making it easier for businesses to set up shop. Finance Secretary Ben Jokno admits that while the economy is expected to continue its growth momentum, rising commodity prices may pose downside risks.
While our economic growth continues to be robust, the operating environment remains uncertain and difficult, with many challenges that must be addressed. Inflation is expected to remain elevated for as long as world prices of oil and other key commodities remain high.
Despite this, Jokno is hopeful that the country will achieve the upper middle income status before President Marcos Jr. finishes his term in 2028. According to latest World Bank metrics, a country becomes an upper middle income economy if it hits a yearly per capita income of $4,256 up to $13,205. Last year, Philippine per capita income was pegged at $3,640 according to World Bank data.
Nag-grow yung economy natin eh. Okay? So, the economy is growing much faster than the population growth, di ba? Per capita kasi yun eh, di ba? So kung economy mo nag-grow ng 8, ang population mo nag-grow ng 1.6, dadating ka doon.
Jokno also said that the government need not borrow funds as much as it did during the peak of the lockdowns, owing to the expected robust growth in the coming years. The Finance Department is also expecting revenues to increase with the planned imposition of 12% value-added tax on digital transactions, which is already being tackled in the lower house.
The Duterte administration left this government a sound tax system. It's a much better tax system than he inherited from the previous administration, and we will enhance the improved tax system. So that will give us more revenues.
For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, we are One News.
Let's zero in on that 8-point socioeconomic agenda laid down by the administration with our guest today, Ferdinand Ferrer, Vice President for Science and Technology of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also the Chairman and CEO of EMS Group. Perry, good morning. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you guys are keeping safe over there.
Good morning, Jess. Yeah, we did feel the earthquake this morning. We did our natural evacuation. Employees are back in.
All right, good to hear that. Okay, let's get right to the topic here. Let me get your thoughts first on that 8-point socioeconomic agenda set by the Marcos cabinet. All points hitting the spot so far, or are they missing out on some key issues here?
You know, what was said earlier, the 8-point agenda, certainly the private sector with support, achieving that 8-point agenda. Where we see is on the implementation gesture. So the key on the 8-point socioeconomic agenda is implementation, when, the timing, and the impact on the different industries. Thank you.
All right. So talking about timing here, do you feel like since majority of the at least of the agenda at face value, it would look like all these plans are too long term, or would you say that these are sufficient to at least address immediate needs?
We believe at the Philippine Chamber, the choices for the secretaries in the cabinet ministers are sound and they are experienced. So we do expect that the business sector does expect immediate implementation or action, you can call it. So there is no long-term or looking right now at short, at medium-term implementation of the agenda.
Now, Jokno himself said that operating environment remains very challenging at this stage, especially also for the private sector. But part of the economic agenda here is to reduce costs in transportation, logistics, and energy. Music to the ears here of the private sector, but plans still in broad strokes. How do you think should this plan be carried out?
You know, those are music to our ears, you know, when you talk about the logistics, lowering logistics costs, both locally and international, as well as the power. We would like to see the details of how it could be implemented, because currently, as we see the global market and what is going on globally, it would be very difficult to see lowering of the logistics cost. We are an import-dependent country. So that's one of the factors. That's why we have a high inflation rate. And when it comes to power, and we all know electricity, power, especially for manufacturing companies, are a big percentage of their cost. So it is welcome news, and we hope that we can see that soon, the lowering of the power.
Can you nuance it a bit more for us, especially when it comes to the challenging operating environment as part of the export sector in EM's group? How challenging really is the environment now?
On the export, especially on our company in the electronics sector, there are several challenges that we're facing now, external and internal. External first is, again, like what you've mentioned, is the higher logistics cost. It costs every company, well, manufacturing, both local and for export, to bring in goods, to bring in materials, cost us more. To produce those materials overseas also cost more. So there's a double whammy effect when it comes to bringing in materials. Now, once you bring in materials, there is also a portion where the lack of those semiconductor chips. There's still shortages on those chips coming in. And as you know, more and more of our devices, whether it's cars or sensors or laptops, all use these semiconductors, which is in short supply. So that is a challenge. Now, internally here in the Philippines, you know, the higher or increasing power rates gives us a challenge. The local logistics costs, and also buying materials locally. We see prices increasing. So holding the fort in controlling our costs is key to keeping the Philippines and manufacturers competitive at this point.
Now, as part of PCCI, I want to get to know more about the level of interest here from the private sector to partake in the country's infrastructure plans and programs. I mean, the plan now is to boost infrastructure spending to further bolster growth, and there's going to be more or less a deviation here from ODAs towards PPPs. What's the reception here from the private sector?
We welcome the PPPs. In fact, we welcome, and when we heard the president announce that he would support the PPP, especially in the infrastructure development, and that was welcome news. It's good news for us. We need an accelerated infrastructure development program here in the Philippines. Not only does it support urban areas, but it also, the biggest benefit is on the rural areas, the agricultural sector, when we have those agri-highways crisscrossing throughout the country, as well as tourism. You know, both tourism and agricultural industries are basically the mainstay and the means of employment in the rural areas. So it's good to hear that the president is supporting that and supporting it through PPPs. We need the private sector together with the government working together for quick implementations of this program. So that is one key factor that we do welcome. And also the digitalization. Digitalization, we need to provide connectivity to all our kababayans in any corner or all corners of the Philippines. By connecting our country, I believe it could provide another million MSMEs into the economy. They will be linked. They will have access to the local market, not only the local, but also the global market. So it will generate a lot of economic activity. So the digitalization, we heard it from the president, is a priority. Digitalization, interconnectivity, which could be the backbone of really together with the PPP infrastructure, backbone of the economic recovery. Thank you.
Okay, so much hope on those programs, of course, set by the administration. But one specific target that they are setting here is to be an upper middle income economy, at least by 2024. But this target has been moved time and again. How realistic is it at this stage for us to reach that goal?
We believe the key to achieving an upper middle income is to have quality jobs. Quality jobs throughout the Philippines means connecting each and every corner of the Philippines through the infrastructure and also that digitalization. Economic activity shouldn't be centered in urban areas. We need to develop the countryside. And giving, if we're able to provide the MSMEs ease of doing business, getting them into the e-commerce, we believe that the rise in per capita income, and that's key to achieving the upper middle income. And it is achievable. But first, we need to connect everybody. Then it will come.
Now,
So we need to spread the wealth throughout the nation, throughout the country.
Okay, a more equitable distribution of wealth here is going to be key to at least achieving that upper middle income status. But this time you also have the IMF seeing the Philippines bucking that global slowdown in growth. But technically they're seeing at least a possible recession here worldwide. How immune is the Philippines here, and how do you think might that impact as well the export sector?
We believe that one avenue to lessen or soften the impact of this possible recession is to lessen the dependency on imports. So there is a lot of inward sustainability, whether it is localization efforts, which we do have the capability. For the export sector, for the manufacturing sector, a lot are still being brought in, but we see the capabilities of the local companies, the medium, large companies, that they could support the manufacturing industries and made in the Philippines products, assemblies, or components. So that could soften the blow on the recession by bringing in more or lessening the importation of products or components or assemblies.
All right. One key, at least from your end, is to lessen dependence on imports there to at least further bolster growth and make the Philippines more immune of a possible recession. Thank you very much, Ferdinand Ferrer, Vice President for Science and Technology of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also the Chairman and CEO of EMS Group. Thank you, Perry.
Thank you. Thank you, Jes.
Now let's pause for a quick break, but coming right up after that. Again, the International Monetary Fund expects the Philippine GDP to grow faster than initially expected this year. More of that and other stories when Businessworld Live returns. Stay with us. And you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jes Delos Santos. More updates on the magnitude 7.3 earthquake that rocked Luzon an hour ago. Operations of MRT-3 and LRT-1 have temporarily been suspended this morning. The same goes for PNR trips for Metro North and Metro South commuter service. Authorities are now checking facilities for possible damage. Now, the International Monetary Fund has raised its growth forecast for the Philippines despite expected slowdown in the second half. According to its World Economic Outlook in July, the IMF's current GDP forecast for the Philippines is now at 6.7% from the previous 6.5%. That's well within the revised 6.5 to 7.5% growth target set by the economic team of the government. The IMF explained that their latest projection reflected the strong recovery momentum of the country in the first half. However, the multilateral lender believes that the Philippines' growth momentum will moderate in the second half of 2022 and in 2023. That's why it projects the country's GDP to slow down to 5% by next year. The IMF also slashed global growth forecast to 3.2% for the full year. IMF Chief Economist Pierre-Olivier Goncha says the world is approaching the brink of a global recession only 2 years after the last one.
The global economy, still reeling from the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is facing an increasingly gloomy and uncertain outlook. Many of the downside risks flagged in our April World Economic Outlook have begun to materialize. Higher than expected inflation, especially in the United States and major European economies, is triggering a tightening of global financial conditions. China's slowdown has been worse than anticipated amid COVID-19 outbreaks and lockdowns, and there have been further negative spillovers from the war in Ukraine.
The central bank signals an interest rate hike of less than 75 basis points at its next meeting in August. BSP Governor Felipe Medalla hinted that the Monetary Board may consider a rate hike of 25 to 50 basis points at their next meeting as they aim to strike a balance between controlling inflation and supporting economic recovery. Medalla also adds that off-cycle rate adjustments are now off the table. This follows the central bank's surprise move of hiking benchmark rates by 75 basis points on July 14 as it sought to contain broadening price pressures. Agrarian Reform Secretary Conrado Estrella confirms to One News that the loan condonation program worth over 58 billion pesos will be, quote, universal. This means the program will be covering all 654,000 agrarian reform beneficiaries. However, Estrella tells the big story that the move can only take effect once it has been passed by Congress and signed by the President. Once it becomes a law, Estrella says beneficiaries, including those whose period of acquisition has lapsed, will be able to claim their land.
At the moment may pasa ito at mapirmahan at maging batas, wala na silang gagawin. Ibig sabihin nun, wala na silang kailangan bayaran na utang sa gobyerno. Libre na yung lupa na ibibigay sa kanila.
In the same program, Estrella said state-run land bank has a complete list of agrarian reform beneficiaries who could avail loan condonation, but he admits that they are still trying to identify those beneficiaries who have already bailed out or sold their land.
There were some who bailed out already at iyan yung hindi pa natin na-determine sa ngayon. Pero kaya nga ako'y umupa na ng mga data scientists upang i-research na yan kung sino yung talaga pang sila pang may-ari at yung iba kung naisanla at hindi nila natumbos, yung iba ibinenta na. Diyan medyo tayo may problema.
The national government's budget deficit has ballooned to 215 billion pesos in June. The Treasury Bureau says the budget gap in June is nearly 44% higher than the almost 150 billion peso deficit recorded in the same period last year. Total revenue collection jumped by over 18% in June to 290 billion pesos. But faster spending outpaced the higher government collection, which stood at around 28% in June. The Bureau explained that government expenditures grew primarily on the back of an increase in costs for road and transport programs as well as projects under the AFP modernization program. Philippine Airlines and AirAsia Philippines said the government's plan to upgrade and build new international airports will open up new growth opportunities for the industry. The carriers were reacting to President Marcos's plans for the aviation sector, which he laid out during his first SONA. PAL says the construction of new international airports will help boost tourism targets, generate economic growth, and create more employment opportunities in the tourism industry. AirAsia, meanwhile, says that it supports the administration's vision for a, quote, better, reliable, and safe air transport through infrastructural development. Now, this from the Philippine Star. Internet providers have committed to increase their investments in network expansion. That's in support of the directive of President Bongbong Marcos to provide connectivity across the Philippines. Telco giant and its subsidiary Smart Communications, PLDT, and its subsidiary Smart Communications has invested in new facilities to improve international capacity and position the country as a data center hub. In particular, PLDT will hook up to the Jupiter cable system to boost data capabilities. Prior to this, PLDT also spent 13 billion pesos to build its largest data center in Santa Rosa, Laguna. Converge ICT is also ready to collaborate with the government in achieving universal connectivity. Converge has installed about 645,000 fiber ports in the first quarter alone. As such, the firm has passed at least 12 million homes and posted a household coverage of over 47% in March. And those are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate front today. I'm Jes Delos Santos. We are One News, all sides, all the time. Don't go away. We'll give you the latest on the local bourse when Businessworld Live returns. Stay with us. All right, a very shaky start our Wednesday morning. Quite rocky as well looking at Asian equities this morning with most major indices starting the day in the red. We're looking at Japan right here, down 0.1%. The Hang Seng likewise also starting the day in the red. Same for Korean stocks as well as Aussie stocks here, down by 0.1%. The Philippines, of course, keeping track of those losses here, starting the day sinking once again to the 6100 level after seeing gains on Tuesday following the president's first State of the Nation address, with some investors expressing optimism over the president's fiscal policy here, but at the same time keeping track of those losses in Asia with, of course, a more edgy start here, considering the possibility of a widely expected Fed rate hike here in the U.S. Again, the index at 6,188. Let's take a quick check at our leaders and laggards for now here. Let me refresh this chart right here. San Miguel leading gains, up 1 6/8%. BDO also continuing gains here, up over 8%. On the flip side, however, you have URC sinking the most here. Look at that, down 3 4/8%. JG Summit likewise also in the red, down 2 4/8%. SM Prime likewise also down by 1 9/8%. And lastly, a quick check here on the peso after it did post a huge jump yesterday, its strongest in 14 years, after you have the BSP signaling that they are not, at least signaling, of course, another rate hike, but not by as much as 75 basis points here in their next policy meeting. But as you can see right in this chart right here, the peso once again weakening a touch here, close to 0.5% to 55.577 to the greenback. And that wraps up today's look at our economic and corporate stories. I'm Jes Delos Santos. We are One News, all sides, all the time. Don't go away. We'll give you the latest on the local bourse. That wraps up our look at the corporate and economic stories today. I'm Jes Delos Santos. We are One News, all sides, all the time.